idealistically or realistically, in this contemporary age, the best thing for you to do is to develop your skills as a personality. Develop your ability to read the news on the air and to do whatever it is that your television station is demanding that you do. And then also develop an interest and gradually develop your skills in true journalism and have the two of them come together. That to me is the ideal position. One of the things that's being required by the television stations today more than in the past, and it's one of the reasons why your school is emphasizing news now perhaps more so than it might have been not very long ago, is the fact that personalities who work as anchors, the Karen Lee model, are also increasingly being told to go out on the street and do reporting. So they may be reporters for 4 hours a day and then they may come in and anchor the noon news. It's a combination job. And if you're not doing well as the on-the-street reporter, which increasingly now is backpacking, so you not only have to be a good writer, but you have to be a good reporter, a good interviewer, a good photographer, a good tape editor, blah, blah, blah. So there's a multitude of skills that go in to being a news person today. When I started in Eugene, in my first TV job, we had about 4 people in the news department. And in order to make us look like 20 instead of 4, what we would do is that one of the 2 of us in a crew would be the reporter on one story and the other would be the photographer, and then we turned it around. The photographer became the reporter and the reporter became the photographer. And it looked like we had these massive numbers of people on the air when actually we had 4. So at that time, we shot and edited our own stories a lot of the time. We did all of the tape editing, or it was film at the time. We did all of the film editing ourselves. And then the industry became much more specialized. And some of the most important people in the history of Channel 9, for example, have been not our reporters or our anchors, but our photographers. Channel 9 was known nationally as one of the better photographic stations in the country. Well, today, the videographer or the photographer, choose your own term, is very rapidly becoming a diminishing species because backpacking has come back. It's what we called, back in my day, we called a one-man band. Now backpacking is sort of becoming the non-preferred terminology to use because it's now known as, and write this down, it's very, very important, multimedia journalist. And what does multimedia journalist mean? You do everything. 3 thoughts. Number 1 is that my job at Channel 7 and my job at Channel 9 were entirely dependent upon the fact that I was versatile. I could do a lot of things. And in both cases, they asked me, can you do sports? And I said, well, I'm not primarily a sports person, but yes, I can do sports. And I was hired at Channel 9 as the sports anchor because the sports anchor at the time was a fellow named Lynn Sanner, and he was very sick and eventually died. And that's the way I started my career at Channel 9, as the sports anchor. I discovered very, very quickly that it wasn't for me and I needed to get out of it, or I would be removed from it involuntarily. And the big break came 6 months later when the news director called me in the office and he said, we're switching you to the anchor desk, and that was a complete blindside. I had no idea that that was going to happen at all. So the history behind that is that I was good enough on the air, I was not good enough in sports. But I was good enough to be given one of the 2 most important jobs at the television station. And it was because of versatility. It was because I can't stand here and tell you that I knew everything of what I was talking about, but I had a pretty good jump on most of the people that I worked with, and that brings me to my second hint. Outwork everybody who has the same job as you do. Outwork them. And outworking in the early part of your career means outlearning. And you're going to learn a lot in the classes that you're in right now, and many of you who have been here for a while have already learned a lot, but there's no substitute when you get into a job atmosphere to learning on the job. So it's very important. And that was the vow that I made back on that day when they called me in the office and said, you're now an anchor. I made a vow to myself, I will outwork every anchor that's working in this town. And I did for most of the time. The third thing is learn somebody else's job. Be versatile. My first opportunity in sports at the station in Portland, and that's really where I began the versatility road, was that the sports director at the time was sick. And this is going to happen a lot. There are vacations, There's sickness, there's personal leave, and it's happening now more than ever because staffs have been cut down to the bare bones in most, not only the broadcasting industry, but in most industries. And inevitably, the boss is going to come into the room, regardless of where you're working. It's going to come into the room and say, such and such is gone. He's on vacation, sick, whatever. Who can do his job? And if you're, I remember the day very clearly in Portland, Oregon. I had worked at the station in Portland, which was KOIN. I had worked there for about 2 months, and so I was still the new guy. And so the news director comes in and he says, Gary Hamilton is sick. Who can do sports? And I waited for the polite amount of time, which was about 2.5 seconds. And nobody said, I can. And so I did. I said, I can. And I was the sportscaster until he came back to work. And a couple of weeks later, they came and asked me to do a weekend sportscast. This is a very ego-intensive business. I have always tried very hard to keep mine under control. How well I've done is to be decided by other people. But I've made the effort. And so I don't want to come right out and say, I know who Clint Barmas is. He used to be for the Rockies. That's extremely egotistical. But what I will do is I'll play a little game or a little scheme. And my scheme is called, I want you to know that I know. It's very subtle, but some way or another, and it takes thinking on your feet, but one way or another, when I hear Clint Barmas's name, it immediately says to me, you have to tell your audience that you know who Clint Barmas is. And so it might be, I might start the sentence by saying, well, when Clint Barmas was playing here, he tripped over a bunch of steps and what did he break? He broke something and it put him out for the whole year and he'd been fishing or something. I mean, it was really, really dumb, okay? So if I'm able to convey that accurately, and I didn't do a good job this morning, but if I'm able to convey that accurately to the audience, there are going to be some people in the audience who are going to say, oh my gosh, that guy knows what he's talking about. Bingo, that's exactly what you want to do. Worst sin that you can commit as an on-air person today or as a producer, anybody in the broadcasting business, the worst sin that you can commit is to be boring, because boring is not marketable, and the marketers run the business. They own the world. You need to be able to ad-lib. What does ad-lib mean? It's a Latin term for ad liberty, and what it means very simply is no script. You're talking off the top of your head. And it's probably the best reason of all for keeping up with the news, because you never know when you're going to have to talk about current events in whatever job that you have. And if you're able to do that smoothly without a lot of ohs, ahs, and particularly you knows, then you have a jump on everybody else, because ad-libbing is an extremely difficult skill.